I'm joined today by my friend William Diaz, who's been working his butt off in Ottawa, covering the Truckers Commission. And what a treat, Eva Chipiuk, the best photo bomber in the country. She's in the background of all my pictures with Tamara Lich. And there's a reason for that, is because if there's not a lawyer in Tamara Lich's pictures, they're going to put her back in jail. Eva, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So happy to be here.
Big testimony today. And before we get too far into the weeds here, I should tell everybody, if they want to get involved in the show and support the work that we do completely willingly, I've got a bunch of different ways for you to do that. You can leave us a paid chat on Rumble or Odyssey. If it's over $5, I'll do my very best, time permitting, to read it on air. But you can also donate to cover the cost of our coverage of the Truckers Commission at truckercommission.ca. You see, our entire team will be cycling through at some point through our Airbnb satellite studio in Ottawa, which is exactly where William and Eva are. So there's your proof positive that we're spending your money in the right place. But today we had Jim Watson on the stand, and it was interesting to hear him say that he never once asked for the Emergencies Act. Eva, you're the legal expert. What's your big takeaway of what you heard from Jim Watson today?
Yeah, there was so much, like you said, big day of testimony. And I think where it becomes really interesting is if you look at the contrast of yesterday's evidence to today's evidence. So here we have, top dog of City of Ottawa, and painting a very different picture than what the top representatives at the City of Ottawa were saying. And it makes me think a little bit, going back to Friday's evidence that we heard, counselors, politicians versus employees, and how evidence is coming across quite differently depending on whether or not you are an elected official or not. And we even saw that today with Kim Ayot, who is also an employee. So lots of good, credible information. One big ticket, big factor item is that emergency lanes were always opened, and they had alternatives, and they had already figured out what to do in the cases where they couldn't access. And the one particular example really is Kent Street. So they had the protocol in place. So really you see the evidence is quite contrasting. And that's what we saw in the media the whole of February. You could look at the same scene and have two different accounts of it.
100%.
Yeah, it was weird to see Jim Watson sort of describe himself as a bystander in all of this. So there was, and it's like, no, you were on the phone with GoFundMe. He testified that it took one phone call with GoFundMe to get everything cut off. He was, and this is something we'll get to, actively meddling with the Prime Minister, throwing, looked like the Prime Minister's office was putting pressure on Watson to put pressure on the former police chief, Peter Slowly, to act in a certain way. And they threw Doug Ford under the bus, which is what you get, Doug Ford, because Doug Ford said yesterday he's standing shoulder to shoulder with Prime Minister Trudeau on the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And then today we see in private phone call exchanges that Watson and Trudeau were sort of saying, well, Ford's not doing enough here. He's the bad guy here, and we're going to hold him to account, likely in the media. There was one thing that I thought was outstanding, and it was one of those things, as I always say, the kids say they need receipts, and boy, they had them today. Watson repeatedly said that the protesters were unreasonable and you could not reasonably negotiate with them. And then there's like this letter. Yeah, and then there's this letterhead from Watson where he was negotiating with Tamara Lich, and he kept saying, I was involved in the negotiations. It was Dean French, formerly of Doug Ford's office. He was doing the negotiating. It was the city manager who was doing the negotiating. It was my chief of staff who was doing the negotiating.
Yeah, so a couple comments on that. One is that the timeline of events you really have to think about it. And I don't think that really came out in the evidence today. So if you paid attention to the timeline, the first time we met with the city manager, that was a Tuesday. And that was under very tense circumstances. And you'll hear that in evidence when some of the protester group will be able to testify. So it was like first meeting, tensions are high, and we're looking to de-escalate. And that was, I think somebody said today, bring the temperature down. And that was exactly it. Dean French came into the picture a couple days later, I believe. We had a kind of a preliminary meeting on Friday night. Sunday, this is 2 days. 2 days later, there's an agreement that is made public on letterhead, like you just mentioned, Sheila, not only from Mayor Watson with his signature, but in response, the Freedom Convoy signed by Tamara Lich. So less than a week. This is how quickly, and yesterday we heard very clearly both of the two that were testifying, they gave evidence saying that they did that to reduce impacts on the area residents. They wanted to do it.
Yeah, it was, we heard that repeatedly. And as I was saying to Tom Morazzo yesterday, it was nothing but grownups in the room yesterday. We had a grown-up in the room in the afternoon today, but not so much in the morning.
Yeah.
Very different from the hysterical accounts that we had from last week, where people were reporting like, my mom's dog's babysitter told me that the truckers were mean, and so terrorism law them. That's what we were hearing from from
Sheila,
some of the city councillors.
Yeah, I think Jim Watson mirrored a little bit the type of statements that we saw last week as well, right?
Yeah, I think we, Olivia, if you're able to, we have a clip of something that the politicians were doing that the grown-ups in the room, the city employees, did not appreciate. And that came out in testimony yesterday, that they didn't appreciate as they were actively trying to negotiate with clients, Eva, that they were bashing them in the media, and they were pointing out, like, you're not being helpful, you're making this worse. But Jim Watson, not one to learn from his mistakes. He thought he would do a little bit of that today when he said that the convoyers were nasty people. Maybe we can roll that clip.
This, once you get down to 100 spread over 3 shifts of 8 hours a day, it's not a lot of officers. And so while we appreciate it every time we saw a Mountie or we saw an OPP officer, we needed the large number of 1,800 to get this situation under control and kick these yahoos out of our city who are disrupting the quality of life of the people of Ottawa. Fast forward, we got what we wanted. Federal government, the provincial government's support. We wanted it sooner because this thing should not have lasted 3 weeks.
I don't know if we have the clip where he calls everybody's, that's the Yahoo's clip, but we do have one where he said that they were nasty people that just don't represent Canada.
I think
as though a mayor from Ottawa has his finger on the pulse.
Yeah, I think it's written in the transcript of his conversation with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I think that's where that's where we see the way he spoke about the protesters.
And I do want to make a comment about that because, the people that were in Ottawa, they saw these comments. The people that were negotiating with the city saw these comments. And what did they do? They didn't go out in the media and name call in return. They continued to act like adults, and they said, that's not why we're here. We're here to end the mandates. We're not here to impact area residents. We're going to be the adults in the room, and we're going to abide by this agreement and move forward. The other thing I wanted to note about what we heard from Mayor Watson today is, and this particularly shocked me, is that he continuously referred to getting his information from the media.
Yeah,
it's just he lives here. Take a walk like Councillor McKinney did, and I actually do very much enjoy her video that she posted walking around with in the protest. And if you actually watch it, there's zero honking, there's zero violence, there's zero name calling. She's taking a stroll down a street packed with trucks. That's what we see.
I liked McKinney's video because if you do watch it sort of out of context and maybe tune her out a little bit, it just looks like a busy street. You can see directly behind her that there's an emergency lane that is wide open, and she's ranting about the truckers and how awful they are, walking right
In their
past them,
face.
and none
Right
of them
by
even
them.
engage with them.
Yeah.
And none of them engage with her. They're just like, yep, we'll just let that crazy lady talk to her camera.
Who's the provocateur there?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's some other things that I thought were quite interesting today. If we could bump ahead to Kim Ayot. Olivia, I know I'm putting you on the spot in the office there. Maybe you might want to grab those clips. I think Sydney cut them. But we'll talk about now, like, you had Jim Watson in communications with Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau looked like he was pushing for an active change in the policing leadership because when we heard yesterday, it sounded like slowly said, no, these people have a right to be here. You might not like the traffic snarl they're causing, but we don't have an ability, or we shouldn't have an authority to limit their charter rights when they go downtown to protest, as long as they're keeping a lane of traffic open. And it looked like the Prime Minister was saying, well, what can we do? What can we do to put some downward pressure on the police chief to bend to our political will? And you can see that in the phone call readout. And to his credit, Jim Watson said, we should be doing everything we can to support our police chief and not allowing this political pressure to come down on him from the top. And it seems as though slowly, and I'm only speculating here, he just sort of fell on his sword, I think, rather than be fired. I think he probably just took the gracious way out because he wasn't going to do the things that they wanted him to do.
I just wanted to share that when we I think it was not even 24 hours that we were basically retained and told to get out here. We came here thinking that we would be in court defending an injunction from the city of Ottawa, because that made sense to us as a legal tool. That didn't happen until well into our third week, and they didn't even serve us with it. So, and we clearly made ourselves known. We were in City Hall. They knew who we were and who we represented. Not all the protesters, but at least, a good chunk that had been recognized. But that didn't happen. And what we did see was an injunction from a private citizen. And if you're looking to reduce impacts, we know that did help with the honking impacts.
Yeah, as we've got video evidence from the anti-honkers themselves. You were mentioning, mentioning something about, no, we're back. You were mentioning something about Brendan Miller's cross-examination, and I keep joking on Twitter that they're going to Emergencies Act him and seize his bank account if he doesn't stop with his cross-examination bloodbath. You were going to make a point about his examination of Watson.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it came out in Watson, but he had referred to the cross-examination with one of the witnesses about Chief Solly looking for an injunction. So that is one of the legal tools that were available to the city. And when we got retained very last minute to help with some of the protesters, recognizing that the landscape is really getting a little hot and some legal assistance might be required, we assumed the first thing we would be defending is an injunction from the city of Ottawa to, well, we didn't know exactly what they would be looking for, but probably parking. We weren't on the ground, so we didn't know the exact situation. That made sense to us. And as we know, they did get an injunction, but that was way late in the game. We weren't even served, although we had identified ourselves as representing some of the key players in the protest. So, that tool was available. And if Mayor Watson today is saying they wanted all tools available, that was one that very much made sense. And we saw how effective it was with the private citizen injunction with honking.
People started to realize this was turning into a very volatile situation when we started seeing fireworks going off and hot tubs brought in, and the behavior I told you about, those 4 or 5 incidents. And, the public who were living here understood fully that this was a horrific situation, and the sooner it got resolved, the better it was for everyone.
A volatile situation sounds pretty darn fun to me. You know, he said
Well, I wanna
fireworks
say-
and then hot tubs.
I never saw one hot tub, and I'm still upset about that. I'm just going to put that out there. So I don't know where they were. I hear they were around, but I didn't see one. And the second thing I want to note, and it was, Mayor Watson today said that he met with the two most affected councillors during the protest and went to a downtown business to help support the downtown business in this chaotic, volatile situation with yahoos around. So, if you just really think about what he says when he's giving his personal accounts of what happened, as opposed to what somebody may have told him or he may have seen on the television, you get a different account. So that's worth noticing. And I'm going to make this point because I have heard this a lot and I'd love to say it here, is people are really asking about hearsay. Why do people get to talk so much about all these things? And, this is an investigative process. It's not an adversarial process. So that's one thing. Normally in a lawsuit, you also don't have 20 or 10 different lawyers cross-examining you later. So that is difficult, and that is where the evidence will be tested. So if two people give the same evidence, what the commissioner is doing, and his job is, as a judge or a commissioner will do, is they test the credibility of the witnesses, and then they weigh it. So if two people say the same thing, and you don't think this guy is as truthful as the other guy, his evidence is going to be weighed with less, just weighed less than the one that's more credible. So that, we saw how engaged the commissioner was yesterday with Serge Alpan, that's also really nice to see from the decision maker, is to see how engaged they are with the testimony and the witnesses. So I just want to point that out because I'm also sitting through a lot of this and, I'd rather get straight to the truth, but that's what we're doing for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's I noticed the commissioner was also asking questions again today of oh darn, what's his name?
Kim Ayotte.
Kim Ayotte, the second witness. He was asking questions of him, and I thought that was kind of interesting too. I think you also asked questions of Jim Watson when he said, okay, so who do you think is more responsible, the provincial government or the federal government, for the lack of police resources that were sent your way? And he said it was both. Definitely not Jim Watson himself, though. It's those other guys that are responsible for the screw-ups in Ottawa. No, did we lose the Ottawa guys again? Okay, perfect. Now, speaking of Kim Ayotte, he gave some very straightforward testimony today. I think there was no BS with that guy. He didn't try to spin anything. You could sort of see where he was going with some things, but he really was pretty darn straightforward. So one thing I thought was interesting, and it sort of blows holes in the hysterical testimony of the city councillors, Matthew Fleury and Catherine McKinney. He testified, I think it was under examination by the government lawyer, that there were 28 tows. So he's in charge of bylaw, ticketing, towing, all that stuff. But he also pointed out that if it was happening in the red zone, the exclusion zone, or the vehicles were related to the convoy, his people were hands off. They weren't going to do it. So if people were saying, why weren't you ticketing and towing these vehicles? He was advised by the police not to. And he doesn't work directly underneath the police, but they don't work in opposition of each other. Yeah. But he noted that there were 28 tows on the first weekend, and then a rapid decline in all the towing happening after. And the government lawyer asked if this was because the tow trucks refused to come. And we've heard that repeatedly. We needed the Emergencies Act because we couldn't get the tow trucks to come for three different reasons. Either the tow truck drivers were scared, or they didn't want to risk their business reputation being involved in doing this stuff, or they were sympathetic to the convoy. They've said that repeatedly. But Kim Ayotte said something different. He said, when the government lawyer asked him if this is because the tow trucks refused to come for whatever different reason, and he said no. He said it was because they didn't need them to tow because the emergency lanes were kept open, which has been something that they've said all along, is that they needed the Emergencies Act to get the tow trucks to come because it was dangerous and they couldn't get to these emergencies, but the lanes were open.
Yeah, that's definitely something we heard today, that emergency lanes were open everywhere except for there was a bit of a congestion more so on Kent and Brito and Sussex. So those were the two areas that were identified. He identified, protesters identified. So that's certainly the case. And it is interesting to see and hear these different accounts.
I think actually Olivia whispers in my ear, we have that clip. So maybe we can show that. Maybe I'm paraphrasing wrong, but I don't think I am.
Is it not true that the protest leaders were actually concerned about maintaining the safety lanes and raised that with you?
They did.
Right. And they wanted to ensure that the lanes were open so that emergency vehicles could always get through?
Correct.
Right. And the protest leaders cooperated with you and the city in maintaining those safety lanes, right?
Yes.
Right. And they maintained them?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah. And when new trucks would even arrive, they even organized to talk with what they refer to as block captains. Did they relay that to you?
No.
All right. But when new vehicles had arrived, to your knowledge, you agree that they always organized to make sure that those safety lanes were open?
Yes.
Huh. Well, isn't that interesting? There was at one point where IOT reiterated that they were not inhibited from attending emergencies by the convoy. And he even said that they were getting complaints from the public, probably nuisance complaints, that emergency services were taking too long. But every single one of those they investigated, they didn't have any high level risks that they were concerned about with regard to response time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is, I understand that Tom Marazzo is coming up after here, and he will definitely be able to speak to that a lot more, because that is something, you know, volunteers came together with their, what they were able to contribute to, and that's something that Tom really took under his wing, is to help organize and make sure that there were always an emergency lane available. It was a logistical nightmare and nobody was in charge, but he was just trying to help facilitate to make that happen.
There was something else that IOT said, and I won't keep you too long, Eva. I think we said we would only occupy a half an hour of your time, and you've been in the same meetings that I have been today. So I know that it can be psychologically exhausting to sit through that stuff. But there was Brendan Miller also cornered IOT, and IOT was quite honest about it. He said that there were 3,000 tickets issued for municipal infractions and provincial infractions between January 27th and February 14th. So up and until the day before, or the day of the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And the exchange was fascinating, because Brendan Miller goes, 3,000 tickets is a lot of interactions with a lot of protesters, and not a single assaulting an officer charge was laid. And, you know, that was one of the reasons they said, oh, we need to invoke the Emergencies Act, because, you know, we've got to crack down on these guys. They're violent. They're going to assault police officers. None were ever laid against the bylaw officers whatsoever, or against any crimes committed against bylaw officers whatsoever. And so the threat, you know, one of the reasons they said they needed the Emergencies Act was, oh, the bylaw officers are going to get assaulted. The tow truck drivers are going to get assaulted. But any of the ticketing and in any of the subsequent towing, nobody was assaulted. I thought it was very, very fascinating. I don't know, Olivia, if we have a clip of that or not. I lost the Ottawa team again. Thanks. Olivia's going to bring one up while I rag the puck a little bit. Here we go.
That's a lot of interactions with a lot of protesters, and not a single assaulting a peace officer charge was laid in relation to your bylaw officers.
That's correct.
Well. How about that? I'm not sure if we lost the team in Ottawa, so I'll just figure this out on my own. I'll keep going. Okay, perfect. It's funny because I've spent the whole day being excoriated by the entire left of the internet saying, oh, you're just repeating, or you're just pushing an agenda. I'm like, I'm literally just repeating the facts here. You might not like them, though. The facts aren't going to go your way, because you might have had a little bit too much CBC, and you're relying on the same set of facts that Jim Watson did to make his decisions instead of the facts before us.
Yeah, and even CBC, you know, retracted their comments about the tomb of the unknown
Russia?
soldier and some of the crimes. Yeah, exactly. They retracted their comments, and both Catherine McKenney and Jim Watson did not take into consideration the fact that the state-funded Canadian Broadcasting Corporation retracted their comment. They still went along with the original narrative, saying that it actually did happen.
One thing I'd love to add too is just going back to the 3,000 tickets and no violent interactions or charges. I'm not a criminal lawyer. That's not what we came here for. And so Keith Wilson and I didn't witness anything that remotely resembled any criminal activity. And we were with our clients, advising our clients, and it was more of a discussion we were talking to police officers daily. They had our numbers. So how are we acting criminally or assaulting people when we have a direct line of communication with the police? It doesn't even add up. It's been an interesting already few days just to hear what was going on the other side and all of the interactions that were going on there when we were there on the ground, having a good time with some of the police officers, really getting to know them and, you know, talking about how we can help, what we could do, where you need trucks moved, and thinking we're all getting along and working together.
Yeah, we saw that with the communications between Kim Ayotte and I think it was Chris Barber, where they were a collegial sort of exchange. I'm moving trucks. I've been working really hard. We're going to start moving trucks again this morning, although they didn't because the police were redeployed after the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And, you know, Kim Ayotte thanking him for his hard work. And that is a testament to how the truckers were dealing with the cops. And the cops, it seems, were getting this pressure from above. Emergency services, they seem to have a good relationship with the truckers. And it all changed. Everything changed when Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act and police resources were instantly redeployed away from getting the trucks off the street. So for all those people who are complaining on the internet about sucking diesel fumes while they're sleeping with their window open on the 22nd floor, I'll have you believe that that doesn't happen. Carbon monoxide goes down, but whatever. But the science doesn't work out. But even if that were the case, a lot of their suffering, their misery, the phantom honking and the phantom smells they tell me they experience, that's on the federal government because they were the reason there were not the resources to get those trucks off the street anymore.
Nailed it, Sheila. There you go. Like there, you see the background now of what was going on with our clients, the protesters that we represented. Daily communications, interactions, very friendly, cordial, reasonable, as we heard yesterday. And then all of a sudden, it just ended. And that was because of Justin Trudeau's actions.
Yeah, and now that we know the timeline, we do know that the city manager and the chief of staff for Jim Watson, I think it was on the 13th, informed two ministers, Bill Blair and Marco Mendicino, that they had reached an agreement with the truckers and trucks were already beginning to move. They said that your clients were operating in good faith the whole time. And still, with that information in hand, they invoked the Emergencies Act the next day and derailed the whole thing.
You got it. Yeah. So that first Monday, there was a bit of logistical issues and you saw that in the text message, I think, with Kim Ayotte, what's going on? We need to move. And then the next day, derailed. Chris Barber was out there again in the freezing cold, as you saw. He's like, I worked my bum off yesterday, got some rest, ready to go again. And he was ready to go out there and they weren't removing the blockades and nobody talked to us. So here we have daily communication, daily talking, but I think that's something that's going to come out. We've already seen the miscommunication and the infighting with the city of Ottawa. And I think we're going to see a bit of miscommunication with police as well, and different departments of the police. And I saw it firsthand. So that's going to be coming up in some of the next few days, I think.
Mm-hmm.